Welcome back. This is episode 2 in a new series of videos I've made to document the history of Good Game Empire. As you no doubt expect from having read the title, today's video is all about 2013. If you happened to miss the first episode and would like to watch the series from the beginning, I'll include a link in the description. 2013 was a busy year for Good Game Empire. The game continued to receive updates about as frequently as it had in 2012, which is to say multiple times per month. Increasingly, however, the updates seem to have been aimed at adding repeatable endgame content or providing a future source of event rewards. You see, back in the early days, it was possible to more or less complete Good Game Empire. What I mean by that is you could get to a point where your castles were fully developed. The maximum level was 50. Players who already had a level 4 walls, towers, gates, and keep kept busy with PvP while they waited for future updates. Anyone with bakeries, watchtowers, or stables that needed upgrades could steadily collect rubies from robber barons and side quests. I'm sure someone in the comments is prepared to tell me that Good Game Empire can also be completed now. I'm sure that's true for substantial ruby buyers. But for the rest of us, there's always better build items, relic equipment or decorations to get, or events to repeat. For much of 2012, as we saw, Good Game Studios responded to this situation by adding a small amount of content at a time. There was often just enough to tide players over until the next update. Even before Good Game Studios published any information about upcoming features on the forums, players received teasers in the form of a coming soon screen upon login. Toward the end of 2012, Good Game Studios began introducing repeatable content like the Thorn King and the Battle for Barrowmond. We saw that last time. 2013's updates gave players a lot more to do. Good Game Studios was able to start building a buffer of content to keep the player base busy while they continued to work on new updates. The first update of the year introduced 2 new adventure maps and weekly honor ranking rewards. 1 week later, on January 15th, a second update added Commander and Castellan equipment. At first, equipment could only be obtained from 3 sources: robber barons, the equipment forge, and in random packs from the equipment trader. There were only 4 different quality levels of equipment: common, rare, epic, and legendary, and a handful of possible effects. A 5th quality level of equipment, red unique items, would soon be added as event rewards and as premium offers through the equipment trader. The update removed the Sword Brothers system from the game. In the 3rd January update, Good Game Studios added the Technicus, allowing players to upgrade their equipment. Players could either spend coins for a chance at an upgrade or rubies for a guaranteed upgrade. Some players came to believe that where precisely you clicked on the coin upgrade button would determine whether your upgrade was successful. At least on the United States server, players would share screenshot guides like this one through private messages in the game. Most were made with a browser extension called Lightshot. Longtime viewers might remember that I shared one such screenshot myself in an episode of Quick Tips, though I noted my belief that it was bogus. The Battle for Barrowmond returned in 2013 with some modifications. In a 4th January update, Good Game Studios made it more difficult to defeat the enemy faction's capital. Additionally, defeating the enemy faction's capital would no longer end the event. Instead, it would trigger a last man standing mode where players of the leading faction could kick opposing players out of the event by defeating their camp. To win, a faction would have to either completely drive the opposing faction from the map or have the most points when the event countdown expired. While the rapid pace of updates was great, it's worth mentioning that Good Game Studios delivered a rather unpolished experience. Almost every update was accompanied by multiple hotfixes, where the game was inaccessible for anywhere from minutes to hours on short notice. At this point in Empire's history, armies continued to consume food while the game was inaccessible. Sometimes they deserted. Attacks launched before the servers went down could still land, with the target unable to adjust his defense or in some cases even see the attack. There were also some game-breaking bugs, including ones that inaccurately represented how much food players' armies were consuming. What's more, Good Game Studios frequently engaged in ex post facto balancing. For example, after players had spent a full week collecting equipment, Good Game Studios nerfed certain equipment values, including on pieces players already owned. In my view, taking away something players have already earned can sometimes be the best option, but inevitably it interferes with players' strategic choices and, of course, their enjoyment of the game. A minor update in February added the Alliance Forge, giving players a new way to collect equipment, and so-called decision-making events around players' castles. The decision-making events, such as picking a favorite between the woodcutter and the stonemason, were disappointing. For many, there was never any reason to pick one of the two options. That update, however, dovetailed into another, which introduced a daily tasks checklist to reward players for being consistently active in the game. In March, Good Game Studios unveiled the Blade Coast, which essentially copied the Thorn King event. Players built camps, conquered island watchtowers from left to right on the event map, and ultimately defeated a kraken to liberate Queen Namia's kingdom. What was particularly exciting about the Blade Coast was that it provided the first opportunities for players to earn unique equipment. Players who completed the event received Queen Namia's scepter. In April, Good Game Studios introduced 3 new resources in the New Kingdoms: charcoal, oil, and glass. The new resources could be looted from barbarian, desert, and cultist towers, or from enemy players, but the update also added production buildings and accompanying quests. Players would also notice ruined villages behind their castles in the New Kingdoms. By repairing these villages, players would unlock shops where they could spend their new resources, including on more unique equipment. It's unclear exactly when, but at some point, players discovered an exploit that made use of the new equipment. You see, one of the possible effects of equipment is to increase the amount of resources looted by a successful attack, up to 90%. Players figured out that those additional resources were not actually deducted from the target's storehouse. In fact, it was possible to loot more of a resource than the target had in its inventory. This led to a practice that we on the United States server called resource farming. Players could almost double their resources by first sending resources to and then later attacking friendly accounts. The practice encouraged players to own multiple accounts in the game, something that was technically in violation of Good Game Studios' policy. Good Game Studios left this exploit unaddressed for a long time. Certain players had benefited from resource farming for years by the time Good Game Studios fixed it, at which point that change made it more difficult for other players to catch up. And then there was a controversy over whether coins counted as a resource. Players thought yes because, well, the game had treated coins as a resource. Equipping the extra resources looted commander equipment had caused players to collect more coins. Because the newly introduced Technicus required a lot of coins, players sought out this equipment. In April, however, Good Game Studios apparently realized that these features were not functioning as intended. In a forum post, Good Game Studios explained that, quote, coins are, of course, a currency, not a resource, and that therefore a bug fix was needed to reduce the number of coins players were looting back to the appropriate amount. The irony, of course, was that, by all appearances, this bug had made its way into the game because some programmer at Good Game Studios had thought coins were a resource, so it wasn't at all obvious. This letter from the game design team, though, which responded to the controversy, is somewhat interesting if you'd like to pause and read it. Good Game Studios explained that it didn't want players to entirely circumvent the taxation system, where you were supposed to build dwellings and send out the tax collector to get more coins. One day in April, players logged in to discover that their charcoal, oil, and glass buildings were missing due to a technical mistake. Good Game Studios issued compensation, but there was some trouble figuring out what the compensation should be and which players were affected. Also in April, Good Game Studios increased the level cap to 70 and made technical improvements to the equipment system so that set bonuses would be possible. The first unique equipment set combined pieces from the Thorn King and the Blade Coast. Good Game Studios also added the ability for players to rotate buildings in their castles. A Lone May update brought new levels of research and made adjustments to premium offers. For free-to-play players, Good Game Studios introduced a new decoration, the Castle Gardens. Another small update in June divided the honor, achievement, and building point rankings up by level brackets. Good Game Studios also introduced 2 new premium buildings, the Hospital and the Master Builder. In late June, Good Game Studios added level 5 fortifications, which increased the number of soldiers on the wall and provided an additional defensive tool slot. Good Game Studios also buffed attack strength to offset these new defensive features. The same update also notably added the game's first temporary appearance item, the Sands of the End Times. This would pave the way for many others, including the Demon Scepter, the Cloudmaker, and the Sundial of the Just. At the time, however, players couldn't slot gems in temporary appearance items because, well, gems weren't yet in the game. Good Game Studios didn't formally announce the addition of premium equipment sets, such as the Armor of the Executioner, so it's impossible to say precisely when they were added, probably toward the end of 2013 or later. These so-called Super Commanders and Castellans, though, were among the first significant advantages reserved exclusively for paying players. Good Game Studios also added a new tutorial for players just joining the game. The tutorial consisted of a short story in which the player returned from a long absence and needed to expel robber barons from his castle. One such robber baron, Wolfgard the Flayer, had kidnapped the player's sister. Naturally, the player would have to defeat Wolfgard to reconquer their castle, free their sister, and begin the rest of the game. I actually never got to experience this because my Brior account was created on June 15th, 2013, and so I didn't know about it until years later. Also in June, Good Game Studios released Good Game Empire 4 Kingdoms in the App Store and on the Google Play Store. Desktop players may not have even noticed the launch of Empire's mobile counterpart. The desktop and mobile versions of the game would hereafter be developed in tandem, however, and I would suggest that some monetization trends from the mobile games market worked their way into the desktop version of the game. In July, Good Game Empire received one of its most significant updates when Good Game Studios added the Nomad Invasion. Now, I'd venture to guess that just about everyone watching this video has played the Nomad Invasion before. You already know that nomad camps appear in the Great Empire and that players can attack and loot Con tablets from them. You also already know that Con tablets can be exchanged for various prizes and that unspent Con tablets carry over until the event appears again. But beyond that, set aside your preconceptions. The event has changed some over the years. Initially, there were no additional points-based prizes for top individual players or alliances. Also, at launch, the artwork for the Nomad camps was a bit different. You may have to pause to find them in this screenshot of the Great Kingdom. Thirdly, for those who are familiar with the Con camp component of the Nomad Invasion, that was a much later addition. Fourthly, the Nomad Invasion was initially intended to be a long-term event, whereas the modern invasion almost invariably runs for only 3 days at a time. The initial version lasted for 2 weeks, and Good Game Studios made clear that it intended the event to be even longer. Fifth, in today's version of the event, a player might attack a single camp hundreds or thousands of times over 3 days. Not so back then. There were no time skips at this point in Empire's history. It's unclear whether for this initial version of the Nomad Invasion, the nomad camps, once attacked, would disappear and then be replaced by another camp that respawned, or whether they would remain in place but go under a cooldown before you could attack them again. Either way, success in the event was about logging in consistently throughout the day to attack as many nomad camps as you could, and you couldn't do so as quickly as you can now. Sixth, back in the day, before players collected better equipment and could recruit stronger units, nomad camps were difficult targets. Good Game Studios expected players to lose about half of their attackers each go. Thus, success in the event also required players to continuously recruit armies. As I've already mentioned, because soldiers could only be recruited 5 units at a time back then, players needed to be online more often. The initial prizes available for purchase with Khan tablets were Nomad soldiers, which were reasonably strong but less powerful than Kingsguard soldiers and Demon Horrors, new and more powerful offensive and defensive tools, including lime bombs, which importantly increase the strength of melee soldiers on the defense, and Horsetail Standards, the most powerful glory-boosting tool for many years, new decorations and unique equipment, including one very strong commander set and one very strong Castellan set. The Nomad invasion became, of course, a repeatable staple of Good Game Empire. It has probably been run over 1,000 times in the game's history. Accordingly, although some kinks in the event would need to be worked out later, it's hard to call this update anything but a success. Note, however, that by building out endgame activities, Good Game Studios was increasing the amount of time it expected players to dedicate to the game. Also in July, Good Game Studios added experience banners, expanded the research tower, introduced a new level of the drill grounds, and adjusted premium offers. By completing the new research, players could unlock the Veteran Swordsman, a unit that was unique for its ability to defend reasonably well against both melee and ranged attackers. However, the Veteran Swordsman was expensive to recruit and consumed more food than other units. At least in my experience, perhaps due to a failure of balancing, the Veteran Swordsman was never really fully a part of Good Game Empire's PvP meta, especially after Good Game Studios nerfed it. I remember it being situationally useful. The update also added the Researcher, a small day event that worked like the Architect. Certain high-level research could only be initiated while the Researcher was present. This, too, was kind of annoying. At the end of July, in a bid to increase PvP competition over resource villages, Good Game Studios added the option to attack them with Shadow Mercenaries. In September, Good Game Studios added a new building, the Hunting Lodge. The Hunting Lodge provides a small increase to food production in exchange for players taking a significant hit to their wood and stone production. Because food production is more important, it was a no-brainer for players to construct and activate this building. The Hunting Lodge can be upgraded with rubies, but this does not increase food production further. Instead, it merely decreases the penalty on wood and stone production. This building version of the Hunting Lodge replaced a different feature that was also called the Hunting Lodge that appeared behind players' castles. You can still see it in the Great Kingdom, but it's not interactive anymore. The September update also introduced Alliance Prime Times and additional ranks for Alliance members. Leaders could now designate deputies and assign generals specialized roles, like Treasurer or Recruiter. A follow-up September update added more Alliance features, like the Notice Board. It also added new upgrades for the Hideout and the Fire Station, and additional levels for Robber Baron towers in each kingdom. A third September update added a new premium building, the Stronghold. Units placed in a stronghold cannot be killed and will not participate in the defense of the castle unless there is a capture attack. In subsequent years, this made the Stronghold useful for protecting outposts. In October, Good Game Studios added Alliance capitals in the Everwinter Glacier, the Burning Sands, and the Fire Peaks. These New Kingdom's capitals allowed players to recruit renegade troops at their barracks. Renegade troops could previously only be obtained in small numbers through the Renegade Spy event in each kingdom. In the Great Kingdom, Good Game Studios added trade metropolises and King's Towers. Trade metropolises functioned similarly to capitals. By capturing a trade metropolis and building a trading office there, the player would give everyone in his alliance a small food production bonus. King's Towers could be occupied like resource villages. They increased the strength of attacks on capitals and trade metropolises. Their significance was to require large alliances to spread their defense out to protect many different targets. I briefly held a King's Tower on the United States server, which you can see in some of my early videos. Players who held capitals, trade metropolises, and King's Towers were generally expected to purchase premium Castellans and to get online quickly in the event of an attack. Overall, the update gave players more to fight over and increased the challenge and reward of defensive coordination. Also in October, Good Game Studios added the Construction Crane, a premium building that would allow players to queue building upgrades. The rest of 2013 was relatively quiet. Good Game Studios iterated on its events, including the Thorn Kingdom and the Battle for Bearmond. Good Game Studios also made technical improvements and added quality of life features. These included new artwork for high levels of buildings, simplified tax collection, a message archive, a new planning view for reorganizing one's castle, displaying additional information on battle reports, and, of course, bug fixes and balancing changes. Finally, in December, Good Game Studios added the Nobility events. These daily contests challenge players to complete a variety of tasks, like defeating robber barons or forging equipment. Some contests, like buying or recruiting soldiers, are obviously won by paid players. Others, however, like defeating high-level robber barons, arguably reward successful free-to-play playstyles. So, there you have it, 2013 in Good Game Empire. In some respects, 2013 was a year marked by controversy. I think we can safely say this early version of Good Game Empire was still a less polished experience. Yet, the year was dominated by frequent, usually impactful updates. Piece by piece, Good Game Studios unveiled its vision for Empire's future. And, all things considered, the game was fairly balanced. The advantages kept exclusively for paying players were few. In fact, at the end of 2013, Good Game Studios unceremoniously disabled the game's premium subscription, explaining that, because of game updates, most of the premium features had become accessible to all players. And as we've seen throughout 2013, Good Game Studios continually iterated on the balance between offense and defense. New towers, walls, and gates were added, but so too was an additional attack wave. Players got stronger troops, tools, and equipment. Untested updates did sometimes disrupt the balance. However, when a new feature proved too powerful, Good Game Studios quickly nerfed it, even if that meant interfering with upgrades or equipment players had already collected. In short, the game was balanced because it had to be. While Good Game Studios had begun to introduce repeatable events, these did not yet run back-to-back. PvP still represented the bulk of player activity. Looking back, though, what strikes me most about 2013 was Empire's emerging community. Empire was never merely about economy management and military strategy. It was about the people who played it. To play Empire was to join an alliance and make online friendships. And even at this stage, certain players and alliances had already made a name for themselves on their respective servers. Those who had played Empire since the beta launch, over 2 years prior, were now considered veterans. Players built and used guide websites, like the Chakravya Alliance blog, which I've had to rely on for old screenshots. Also, throughout this video, I've shown clips recorded by Sam Skalick, who, as far as I can tell, was one of the first English-language YouTubers to cover the game. Something about Empire was special and motivated the development of these communities. In Good Game Studios' own words, it enjoyed a successful year, quadrupling its revenue and more than doubling the size of its workforce. Things were looking up. So, there you have it, a happy ending for this video. Thanks for watching. Goodbye for now. Tune in 2 weeks from today, and we will discuss 2014.